Well, welcome everybody.
Thank
Thank you for joining us for our open forum, Ask Anything. It's September 23rd. I'm broadcasting from Cambridge, Massachusetts. So for me, it's 11 a.m. and I know for many of you, this is a different time zone. And the majority of you, as we've gotten accustomed to, are watching on a different day. So the beauty of our availability on the interwebs is that it's no longer about being available at the right time at the right place. And so not only is it Ask Anything, but it's anytime, anywhere. So I'll just start with just a brief introduction and then turn it over to my colleagues and co-faculty and also integrate our live attendees. My name is Damian Shield. I'm the Senior Director for the Institute for Medical Simulation here at the Center for Medical Simulation, and we're an independent nonprofit in the Boston area related to all of the different Harvard University Medical School and affiliated hospitals in that we support various programs.
you.
One of our main areas is around faculty development in experiential learning, primarily around simulation. And when the pandemic started and travel was halted, we really wanted to have a new way of connecting with people internationally and got into, with everyone's support, a weekly webinar. We've had different kinds of sessions um, that really meant to connect the simulation community internationally, keep us available and with you. We had keynote presentations and panels. We have now some new formats like open forum like this, as well as meet the author. We had last week a great conversation with Jeff Cooper, who is a professor of anesthesia and our founding director, about a recent paper he wrote about a case of investigation of patient safety and error that he did in the 1980s and just recently published, is forthcoming on the Simulation in Healthcare journal. And that's a really fun new format that we have. So appreciate all of your support because that motivates us to promote these courses and put them on. And it's just evolving slowly. As I mentioned, a lot of the content is available for you to enjoy and share through our website. There's a lot of resources at www.harvardmedsim.org, and there's a QR code that you can avail yourself. And we'd also love for your suggestions as the topics of professional development and also increasing your skills in education have been working, but we're also looking to serve your needs. So please do let us know what you're interested in. For today's session, I'd like to start with welcome and introductions. That's going to include us on the panel as well as folks who are joining. We'll ask you to use the Q&A function to introduce yourself, let us know your name, where you're logging in from, and any questions that you might have. Please start giving some of those for us. Some folks registered and gave us some questions in advance, and we'll be tackling those as well. We'll have an open forum, and then towards the end, I'll share with you the next few weekly webinars and a couple of other future opportunities. So with that as my introductory remarks, I'd like to invite Jenny and Chris, my friends and colleagues, to share a bit about your background, your role at CMS, and anything else you'd like to share in terms of what you're thinking about and working on today. Start with Jenny.
Hello, everybody. I'm really weirdly challenged and excited by this moment in time. As an organizational behavior scholar and the executive director of the Center for Medical Simulation, I am spending most of my time thinking about how do we, as simulationists, reinvent ourselves in this time. And so what I'm excited to talk about today are your questions regarding how we reinvent and how we plug ourselves in as simulationists. One of my areas of passion is how do we simultaneously hold ourselves to high standards for excellent performance in healthcare or management or meetings or all the different things we have to do every day while holding high regard for each other. So that's hard to do sometimes, easy to judge, easy to be nice, hard to do both together. So that's kind of what I'll try to bring to the party today, and very happy to be here with all of you.
That's great, Jenny. It makes me think of how do we fit in self-care in the right ways. So look forward to hearing more about that.
Thanks, Damien. Great
Thanks
talk.
for joining. Chris Rusin.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Damien. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Anne. And hello to everybody. I'm Chris Rusin. I'm Senior Director for Educational Leadership and International Programs at the Center for Medical Simulation. I am a PhD organizational behaviorist. I really love to think about, I'm glad this field exists and that I could study in that area because I'm fascinated with how people work together. What happens when we try to team up? What happens to us emotionally, positively or negatively, depending upon what we do? How can we organize our efforts such that we're more successful and safer and better off and psychologically doing better? So very excited to kind of take those concepts and bring those to healthcare about 6 years ago when that happened with me. And these days, incredibly excited, just like Jenny said, there's this challenge before us. How can we use learning processes? How can we use simulation to help us in this incredibly different and difficult moment, and also a moment I think that's filled with lots of opportunity that we can talk about today to, like Jenny said, reinvent ourselves. And just great. I love open forums, so excited to hear what people ask and excited to see where we go today.
It's so interesting to hear you both introduce yourselves. Of course, I've been in this situation with you many times, and I think that when we introduce ourselves, part of what we're doing is we're putting out part of our professional identity. And at the same time, I know that we all wear so many different hats. And so, you know, there's the scholars in you, there's the, you know, at the simulation bedside educator side in you, there's the one-on-one mentor in you, there's the writer in you. And it makes me think of this presentation I saw by Peter Diekman when he said, like, we have these different parts of our personality that come out that are like our mask or our hats. And so, yeah, so I think that's similar happens for those of us with clinical backgrounds. We also have I have my emergency physician side of me, and then my bedside educator side of me, and my mentor side of me. And so that's always fun.
It is.
So, you know, in preparation for this session, I had this dilemma that I was talking with Anne Mullen, our program manager, about, because we were wondering, you know, people supply us questions when they register, and I wasn't sure when we present those questions, should we be highlighting from whom they're coming from, or should that be confidential? And I'm having the same dilemma here. I would love for people who have joined to the live session here to introduce themselves through the Q&A, and then we could say who you are. On the other hand, if you're joining and don't write in the Q&A, I feel like I don't want to betray the trust and say, oh, welcome. So, you know, I could certainly share that I do see people from many continents. I see folks joining from the US and Canada and India, and some folks that I'm not immediately recognizing their names. But like I said, I'm hesitant to call on anyone explicitly. Jenny, Chris, any thoughts?
Yeah, so let me just invite anybody who is here to please just introduce yourself on the chat if you're comfortable doing so. So we can say hi to you and talk to you about what are your interests. And if you choose not to, no problem. I think Damien will probably roll ahead with the questions that we got in advance, but we certainly prefer to interact with all of you.
And I think there's this broader question, because like many CME and simulation societies, the Society for Simulation in Healthcare just announced that IMSH is going to be online or virtual this year. And so how we connect, how we interact is going to be a big part of the near term. But I think the future, I think the COVID pandemic and situation is not just going to change the pre-vaccine period, but forever. So thank you, Gitanjali Ramachandra, for saying good morning. Would love to know where you're from and where you're joining. Oh yeah, there I see Gita from PD Stars. Oh, fantastic. That's a leading organization in India that I know I've been connected throughout the years. It looks like they're saying hi to you, Chris, as well. Hi, Roxanne
Gita.
Gardner, one of the senior directors, a key person on our team. Glad to see you here. Shiba from the core faculty in OBGYN in the UAE, but originally from India. Great to have you as well.
I love seeing my friends on these in these forums. It's great. Gita, so great to hear from you.
Very nice. So as you're, I appreciate those of you who have introduced yourself, and I would like to invite you to, you know, just continue to interact with us. I know it says Q&A, and it's a little, could be a little awkward to interact through that. It's the best that we can do right now, given bandwidth and our platform. And I'll get our conversation started with a couple of questions that we did have, and look forward to this as an ongoing interaction throughout this hour. So Jenny, Chris, I love this Ask Anything forum in part because it comes on the week after our Healthcare Simulation Essentials online course. During last week, I know I was fully engaged, connecting with participants. We had 21 people from all over the world working on their simulation skills. Many of their questions got answered during the course, and some were sort of left in the air as next steps. And I'm just coming off a really a high, if you will, because they're people who were just either starting a new career and entering the sim world, or they've been in sim and taking their next step. I'm just wondering, how was your experience teaching and last week, and what are you thinking about this week with regards to it?
I mean, we've always had an emphasis at CMS on giving people practical skills that they take home and use. And for me, that's absolutely thrilling. I love connecting to people's projects. And I think that in the new curriculum, the skill sets that we're giving people that allow them to create deep partnerships back in their home institutions, their home organizations, their hospitals, their schools. It's really allowing people to design kind of fully realized projects and to have a very strong idea about what they want to do when they return home, and to have made some incredible progress during the course. So it makes me even more excited. I mean, the projects are just so three-dimensional as people are working on them. Jenny, I don't know how you feel about that, but for me, that was absolutely thrilling.
Yeah, I'd say I agree. And the other thing that was thrilling for me was that creating a sense of community and peer support, mentor support, joy in a shared project across the week of just being teachers and learners together, worked online. You know, I think we've all had a lot of anxiety as to whether the beautiful sense of connection that I think is a wellspring for so many of us would transfer to the online environment. And I certainly was delighted by that.
And Damien, spending the week with these 20 plus participants and plus all the rest of the faculty is a phenomenally rich way to spend a week. And then, in the next week, you kind of miss all of those people. Yeah, that too.
Oh, that little withdrawal. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I got at least 2 emails from participants. I feel like there's a thread there, and
Mm,
I'm connected on Twitter with 2 others, and of course, it's just so fun and intense with amongst the faculty. So,
yeah. Yeah.
um, Jenny, I totally share that. I was so nervous about connecting online, debriefing the debriefing online, and so pleasantly surprised that it's a lot of it just feels so similar. So
Mm.
maybe it's because we do so much of our daily work online now, or maybe
Yeah.
it's because seeing the micro expressions and being in front of folks, just so much of it is working. So.
Mm. I agree.
Um, Oh, great. So Maybelle, who is joining from DC, and that's great because I was about to bring up a question that she gave us in advance. So, um, and I thank you, Maybelle, for the update here. So you're working on telesim and anti-racism projects, and coming off 4 ED shifts in a row. So, and you're wondering if folks are doing in situ work again. So I know you had shared with us that you were hoping that we could talk about how do we promote in situ simulation, and especially how do we increase engagement and take away the roadblocks to participation. In situ simulation being simulation activities generally paired with debriefing for either education or discovery of latent safety threats and working with intact teams in the hospital setting as opposed to in a simulation center setting. And I think these are great questions for us to talk about to start with. So
I'll say that,
I would say,
Damien.
let's first talk
Yeah,
about in situ, then I think
yeah.
maybe we can come to talk a little bit about telesim, as there are a number of questions on telesim. And then if we don't get back to talking about anti-racism, which is important to me, and I know um, to the rest of the organization and Jenny and Chris, there's a number of weekly webinars. We did 2 big sessions that are on our website. I thought those were great conversations and need to keep those going because um, we have a long way to go as I'm looking at our little panel here. So Chris,
So
So
to you.
yeah, so Maybelle, one thing I'll start off by saying is that I work with a number of hospitals around the world and also with hospitals locally here in Boston. And there's a movement afoot to redefine the rules of gatherings such that we can allow simulation to happen in situ. Um, and so, it's okay to bring 10 people together if you're doing it for simulation that has a practical application in the moment. And I think I've seen a number of these rules passed very, very, very recently. So there's a recognition that we need this sort of practice in our patient care spaces, that with how rapidly the environment is changing and with how rapidly conditions change, illnesses change, ideas about how to treat patients and organize care change, we absolutely need ways of practicing kind of at or near the point of care. And so there is recognition of this. One important thing to do is to change a hospital's policy about gatherings, because you need to formally allow the courses to happen in this moment, and differentiate getting together for sim from getting together for other reasons. And so I've noticed that. I find it extremely encouraging, and we're trying to shape that with the hospitals that we work with.
I'll say I think my thoughts on this are completely in evolution. I
Mm.
feel like there's so much to be thoughtful about that I'm not yet sure if I have a very, very clear view. I did some work both at CMS and also with an international group collaborating on how to reopen sim centers. And we're lucky to have that published in Advances in Simulation. We discussed it in our Ask Anything last month. Um, Having said that, I'm thinking about a couple of things. One is for in situ simulation, the participants are generally going to be scheduled to be there for work. So in a way, they're already allowed to be there. Of course,
Yeah.
we're at Brigham and Women's Hospital where I do my clinical. our lounge where we have lunch, which would typically be where we would go do an in situ debriefing, is now highly restricted. The tables are for one person and it's much less occupancy. So it wouldn't be business as usual, but folks would be there anyways.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that, having recently read the manifesto that many of our colleagues have published in BMJ STEL, they called for protecting simulation technicians and professionals who are putting on the sim from unnecessary exposure. So in a way, I'd have to think about, okay, well, who's going to bring in the mannequin, or are we going to hire an actor and they're going to be unnecessarily exposed? And so I'm still thinking about how to do that safely. What is the social distancing and PPE necessary and possible to make in situ sim happen? I've got two other thoughts, and then I'd love to turn to Jenny. One is, well, do we need to do in situ sim, or can we reach those goals by debriefing the actual cases that are happening, or gathering people for experiential learning that doesn't have to do with simulation? What are some of the other tools in our tool chest as simulation leaders? And finally, well, what is the purpose? How does this make sense for the institutional mission, and what are the KPIs we're trying to affect? And then I might better know whether it's time to restart our in situ simulation project. So is it mission critical? Is it especially critical now during this pre-second surge? What is the in situ sim project about? Because there's great diversity in why people do in situ sim. So those are just some thoughts on the topic from my end. Jenny?
Yeah, thanks, Damien. And Maybelle, feel free to text us back in the Q&A as you react to this. I'd love to get your take and further comments or questions, or anybody on this call with us. So I've been a bit of a student of Chris Rusin over the last year and a half, thinking about how do we position simulation to solve point of care problems. And so one of the thoughts I have about that, Maybelle, is there are things that we are still being asked to do, or simulationists are being required to do, just as we were when the COVID surges started here in the Northeast. And I guess I'm wondering whether we could leverage such things as, continuing training on safe establishment of an airway in the OR with proper infection control and PPE and et cetera, as a way to build bridges to broadening that, because there are certain things that our institutions are still pulling us to do. And instead of us having to sell them on in situ sim, maybe we're better off solving whatever their ongoing PPE problems are. And I'll just name, and infection control problems are, I'll just name a few that I have heard about. So one is goals of care conversations are still something that our pediatric colleagues, who don't often have kind of end of life conversations, were having to get better at. Their residents were having to get better at there. And a lot of that could be done online in a way, but some of that involves communicating through the shut door of a room, or new skills for these people. I already gave the airway example, and there's, I'm sure people on this call may have a few others. So I think my strategy would be let them pull us and then bridge from there. But love to get other, people who are attending, love to get your take.
Well, Roxanne Gardner is sharing that her department at the Brigham in obstetrics and on the labor floor, they're back to doing 1 or 2 days of IPE drills in situ, with being mindful of the number of participants and focusing not just on CRM, but also introducing and familiarizing the staff with the new bundles of clinical care management. So very, I think, mission critical, mission specific, which I think speaks to the engagement question which is, I think it's much easier to get people engaged in situ sim when there is a need to know, when it's relevant, which requires, in my view, that we're very transparent and clear about what are the things we're going to be doing. So I think, whereas in the past there was a culture of surprise mock codes that people felt unprepared for and possibly been put on display in an area that's not your strongest, if you instead say, look, we're going to do in situ sim on this topic, please be on the lookout. If there's no surprise, we just all really want to practice, what happens when we're getting a transfer from the OR and instead of being as stable as they were built, they suddenly crash. How do we react to that? Be on the lookout for that deteriorating patient. I think that's a need that people have. We want to succeed, we want to excel, and we know what's coming.
Yep.
I think that I went at IMSH last year. I was very impressed with the University of Alabama Birmingham group, their presentation on in situ sim. I think that April Bell and Marjorie Lee White's concept of a institutional pre-brief that they just send it out by email, message it. I thought that was really helpful.
So I'm just looking at Maybelle's comment back about she liked the idea of debriefing real events more consistently. And what that suggests to me, everybody, is whether we call it an institutional pre-brief, whether we call it a longitudinal pre-brief, whether we call it building partnership in advance. I'm thinking, Maybelle and others, that maybe part of our attention needs to be directed to creating pre-agreements that we have a golden moment to learn from real events now, and potentially some routine debriefing at the end of a patient transfer, or routine debriefing at the end of the management of a trauma in the emergency department. Or I can imagine there are other, routine things that happen in the emergency department that we can get 1% better at that might be valuable.
Let me invite Chris and Jenny for you guys to talk about the fresh off the press publication, which I'm sharing here, about Circle Up and how this might be a possible addition or opportunity to replace your in situ program with a broader program. Chris, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, sure. I'll get it started, and we can do it together. To Maybelle and others, there are a few ways we've been thinking about debriefing real events lately. One, of course, is what you brought up, which is this idea that something happens, it's notable, it's positive, it was challenging, there's a great learning opportunity, and so we organize a debrief around that thing. And another way of thinking about debriefing, and it's referred to in this Circle Up concept in paper, is to think of debriefing as something that we're doing regularly and that we're packaging with other sorts of conversations. Like the Circle Up concept recommends that we, near the beginning of our shifts, connect with one another and have a briefing such that we plan our day, we plan to support one another, we have some quick mental rehearsals about things that are new or novel or difficult coming up that day, that we check in with one another as we work, that we talk in ways that improve learning and performance around important events, and that when we get near the end of a shift, that we make time to debrief such that we're regularly, every day, every shift, doing some processing near the end of our shift. So we have this kind of regular briefing and debriefing and check-in loop and cycle that is, of course, just filled with massive amounts of learning, and can also be used for planning other events and recognizing that we need other things and other supports. And so
I'm excited about this, Chris, because I think it puts the talent of simulation professionals to do debriefing at the point of care, and gives us a lot of options going forward.
Yeah, agreed. The skill sets that simulation people have are really amazing skill sets. They do belong in the everyday, and we often isolate them and think about them as things that we do during courses. when we could be applying briefing, good debriefing, good processing, good planning to the everyday. But the thing is, we don't have those activities typically scheduled into what we do every day. So we need to start thinking about that as something that we make time for, or adapting existing ways of huddling to be a little more learningful.
I think this paper and others of this last few months really expands the concept of clinical event debriefing as that event-driven, trigger-driven, problem-driven reflection and learning to a routine clinical debriefing, implementation of a system. Jenny, anything you'd add here before we move on to maybe talking about telesimulation and some of the opportunities of the moment?
Well, if our participants are comfortable with it, I would love to hear any reactions from any of them about this idea of shifting some of our attention to pre-agreements with our colleagues about doing debriefing of real patients, or whatever they're thinking about popping simulation into the real world, whether it's briefing or debriefing or something else. So please feel free to text us on that. I'd love to see what you're thinking in the Q&A. I think, again, the thing that I am having as a steady drumbeat in my own mind is a concept from one of the organizational behavior scholars whose work influenced me a lot, named Ed Schein. And he talked a lot about education and research as stronger, better, faster when we're asked for help. And so I think putting more of our energy into finding out what people need and want and how to be prepared and how to be ready and what are their problems would be the best way for many of us simulationists to spend our time right now, instead of trying to sell what we do have. And instead try to repurpose what we're doing, reinvent what we're doing for the moment.
I think that's very much compatible with the third figure here, and then I'll stop sharing the screen. But I think if we start thinking of whether it's simulation or these kind of interventions as not just the session themselves and circumscribed to that learning period, but really part of a system, and we think that, okay, it starts with team and vision, then we're really connecting to the sponsors, and then we can get into the logistics and the training, and we'll know what to do if we have a clear goal on the problem at hand. I know when I previously ran a sim center, our goal was number of sessions, number of participants, let's deliver simulation. So much more on the what than the why. And I think that's a shift that's helping me now, and I think is helping a lot of people. And I'll use that as a transition to propose a new topic for us, because we got a number of questions from folks asking us to discuss telesimulation, which is the what. It is the idea that we're going to be doing simulations and experiential learning on Zoom. It could take many different forms. It could be interactive on-screen discussions with actors. It could be using digital monitors to display physiology. It could also be using live cameras in a simulation center, participants working remotely, debriefers working remotely, and still using the sim center as the focus of the activity. I imagine it could take a lot of different forms too, but those are some of the ones that I've been thinking about. And so we were asked, what are some applications for effective telesimulation? Where could these ways of interacting be useful? And so I would ask us to kind of consider that question, and also consider what are some of the problems we might be solving with telesimulation. And before I hand it off, I would also say that in a way, just like COVID has asked everybody to change the way they think and work, it's asked health systems to really get way into telehealth. I think that an opportunity for folks who are used to doing in-person immersive simulation, it's asking us to also go into the telesimulation and teleeducation space. So what are your thoughts on applications of telesimulation in this day and age?
Damien, can I throw in a few examples of things that I'm aware of that we've gotten involved in, and then maybe we could share some others. And I'm inviting Roxanne Gardner, our Senior Director of Clinical Programs, to chime in from the Q&A if she's still on, because she's leading a number of these efforts. So one thing that I think can be done with telesimulation is virtual simulation, as Damien noted, with vital signs and an actor patient or a still image with a voice. These are all things that we're doing, other people are doing. Dr. Roxanne Gardner, who's on the call right now, is working with our colleagues at the Institute for Health Professions to think about what we could do in the virtual clerkship space. And so she's working on 6 different PA, physician assistant clerkships that are going to have some virtual simulation, some in-person simulation, and so on. I'll mention one other specific example that Damien alluded to. Through the Massachusetts General Hospital, we got a large, the hospital got a grant from a local pharma organization to develop STEM capabilities, science, technology, engineering, and math, in Boston area high school students using medical simulation, nursing simulation. So we're using multiple modalities in that program, but one of them is literally having excellent cameras in the simulation center itself, where our emergency medicine physician colleagues and nurse colleagues are enacting various challenges, and then putting out to the students who are online like this, except on Zoom with text capability and talking capability, what do they want to do to manage the patient? So this is something that our colleague, Jim Gordon, the Chief Learning Officer at Mass General Hospital, has been doing for years with both medical students and high school students, which is bringing them in to take care of a STEMI patient, for example. So we're just basically broadcasting that live onto Zoom or whatever. So those are 2 modalities of telesim that are happening here.
I think
Go ahead.
just one of the reframings that I've gotten, or I'm in the process of this, over the last 6 months, is that whereas I think that simulation is the bee's knees and want to be in person and think it's the best, it's possible that a lot of our online opportunities are actually better. So you can have experts from around the world. You can switch rooms. You can have as many rooms as you want. You can switch rooms without wasting transition time, because you don't have to, you have to get up so you don't cramp up and lose your muscle mass, but you don't have to go to another room. You don't have to be confused about what room you belong in. And so I think that this is just a welcoming time to say telesim is sim. There's lots of good things we can do with it. And there's probably a solution to many situations waiting to happen.
I have another angle on this, guys, which is with telesim. So there are various different objectives that we think about when we think about whether we need sim or not, right? And sometimes we need to learn skills, practice skills. Sometimes we need to learn and understand better and practice situations. The one I always talk about is recognizing and managing septic shock. My colleagues chuckle because I say that over and over again. Can we do that with telesim? What can we do with telesim? Can we refine and improve and better understand our teamwork processes? And therefore, what can we do with Zoom or telesim? And I think as we start to think about each of those problems separately, we start to understand what we can do. And it is important to think about them separately. because they are separate types of activities. They're different. They each have their own character, and therefore they each have their own optimized curriculum. And I just want to point at improving teamwork. So we often think teamwork simulations are these extravagant, like carefully engineered, full body mannequin. There's bleeding, there's resuscitation happening. And then what do? We go and we debrief. And in that debriefing, we reflect upon what happened in the scenario, but then we tend to think about our practice more generally and how these situations occur in our real practice. And we start to share mental models and share understandings of challenges and share understandings of solutions. And that's where the magic happens, right? And that's what Center for Medical Simulation is like really, really known for, is developing great debriefers and doing great debriefings. And we sometimes say simulation's just an excuse to debrief, and it's really true. And I think we're going to start to understand the power of Zoom as a great place to be for debriefing. And we may not always need that extravagant simulation to get us to the right mental place to debrief what we do and to develop what we do. And that there are all kinds of possibilities for sharing mental models, developing teamwork, developing process, and maybe even understanding scenarios better, maybe even understanding skills better. And we should think deeply about what we can accomplish in conversations of different types in order to accomplish the goals that we need to accomplish in the moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have this two other forthcoming publications, one from the clinical debriefing at the Brigham, which was nightly 9 p.m. Zoom calls, optional. Let's get people together, hear them out, see what they're learning about, see what they're innovating, see what their challenges are.
Yeah.
And then with our affiliate in Liège in Belgium, they were able to debrief multiple emergency departments and ICUs throughout the city through Zoom. It would have been impossible for a single trained debriefer to get across the city to catch all these end of shifts with our new Discover Phase tool that catches people at the end of a shift. And Zoom is the enabler, not necessarily the downside, but the upside. So
Yeah.
I think, and one more, just looping back to Jenny's sharing of the project for clerkship, it's really like very critical that we continue clinical education in this time when clinical education volume has been down, opportunities are much lessened. There's a shortage of PPE. So I think, if telesim is like plastic, like we need to be investing in it. I just gave advice to a colleague who runs a sim program in a local hospital. I said, find out who your IT tech, ed tech support, and virtual learning people are in your program, because you need to be partnering with them. That's the new and exciting, and we're going to come out stronger, being less siloed and more connected. I want to give it one more twirl and ask you another question that came from participants, which is, what about in the developing and low income setting? What are the opportunities for telesim in low resource countries? Thoughts?
So I think a really important gating mechanism there is internet or not internet. So if there is internet and the bandwidth is sufficient for streaming, sound, video, etc., then everything we've spoken about here to some degree can work. If the bandwidth is narrower, such that video is not a reasonable option, one of the things we've done at the MGH in our OR teams for qualified staff course over the last couple months is we use an audio trigger tape of something going wrong in the OR, which we then discuss in a debriefing. So that's a much lower bandwidth requirement. And then the last thing there is, in the absence of adequate bandwidth for easy teleconnection, if there are landlines, again, we can do something around audio transfer. So my knowledge in this area is somewhat limited, but I have had a couple conversations with colleagues around the world about this limited bandwidth challenge and how do we get around it. So that's what I'm speaking to. Others on the call may have some other thoughts on this.
It'd be nice to have Geeta on featured as a presenter on a future session of this, Damien, because she has such experience doing this. One thing I'll say is if you can get people on a video call and they have their own box, each of the three of us have our own box here. And there's actually there can be really nice kind of equalizing effect there. People have their space on the screen and they have their opportunity to speak. And then it's up to the facilitator to create conversation that includes all voices. But if you can get the technology to people, you can create great conversations, just referring back to my previous comment, and give people equal voice in a conversation, which can be a really nice feature of Zoom, I've found.
Yeah, as I was thinking about the question, I was thinking no major difference. The only thing that I was really came to mind right away is I would not try to design a telesim from here in Boston for someone in a different resource setting. I would work with them. They really should be the driver. I think that would be my, if there's a concerning side of the teletechnology that we could find ourselves anywhere, I would just want to make sure that we're not repeating any kind of colonial and post-colonial negative impacts, and that we're not pushing our own views and values externally. And that's
Damien,
where I was with my thinking.
I want to highlight what you said, which is we're not presenting finished solutions. I'm just saying the same thing you just said, but I liked it so much, Damien, I want to say it again, which is, we would always partner up with someone, understand their conditions very carefully, and then build something that works for them. And so
so Geeta and Geeta's taking your invitation to pop in to say, we're taking the Leap monitors from that's the Laerdal software. We're using Zoom, and by the way, we have no connection to any of the companies, and certainly not sponsoring this session. But we're using the dynamic monitor to do simulation sessions in the country. In those ways.
And Damien, Maybelle popped in the ASEP Sim website here, which I'm just going to flash on the screen for a second, which has all these little online resources for doing things online. So that's cool. And there are other, Ann Mullen, I'm blocking on the name of the box for OR safety that's available from Alan Mary and others. All those materials are another great.
Lifebox.
Lifebox, thank you, Damien. So that's another great product that potentially could be repurposed and demonstrated and used in sort of a bridging method from one place to another with the Lifebox actually in place.
Damien, if you don't mind, my mind is going back to something that we talked about earlier in the conversation, which was kind of in situ sim and what you can do to start doing that again and to make that a better option. And I'm thinking about something that was done really well at Boston Children's Hospital, which was to socialize the simulation technicians or engineers, as they call them, to the hospital, such that they are comfortable in the hospital and that the hospital is comfortable having them there. And this is a process of, creating relationships, creating rotations of people such that they are working in the hospital and can partner up, and then making it such that it becomes normal. And now you have this capability in the hospital, and some simulation programs and centers are separate enough from the hospital that this is not in place yet. Others have a really robust version of what I just spoke about. But if you have simulation technicians and others who are comfortable in the hospital, now you can mobilize them just in time to the places where rehearsal are necessary and training are
Yeah, like
necessary.
in COVID speak is like, who's an essential worker? Is your
Yeah.
sim staff an essential worker? And if so, you've reached that state that you're describing where your sim team is embedded to the hospital and therefore they have full access and uh, they're up there. And if they're non-essential and they're working from home, then they might depend on telesim to make it happen. And I'm just going with this as a final inspiration is somebody should invent the value of telesim in situ. Who, how do we pop in to the clinical settings virtually such that we're doing the in situ work without being on site? Maybe there's an application for that. And then one last twirl on that is if you have standardized patients, secret shopper type simulations for your telehealth providers, that's telesim in situ, and it would probably yield some valuable um, course correction and data to support the program and possibly to let people know how well the telehealth is working, which I know it's just been a major savior for folks that are sick and scared and don't want to go in. I just had a consult for my 5-year-old is still not sleeping. Newsflash. So we had our sleep specialist telehealth visit, and boy, I really enjoyed not having to drive and put the kids in the car and really make even more time out of our busy lives to make it to that appointment. And the fellow was amazing. And then she called the attending, they chatted briefly off camera, and then the attending joined the call, and then they gave us further guidance. And I just had such a great experience, and it's probably not by accident. So I think telehealth's in situ sim opportunity. You heard it here.
I mean, Damien, that's one phenomenal example of what Jenny alluded to at the beginning of the call, which was that this is the moment. We've had our world shaken up, and look at all the opportunities to adjust, and look at all the opportunities for creative delivery of medicine and healthcare. Look at all the opportunities for creative delivery of training and simulation and debriefing. How do we steady ourselves such that we can see the opportunity? I think is one of the questions before us that we've been working on a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is really getting to the end of our time together. So before I transition into talking about next week and some other future opportunities, I want to invite Jenny and Chris, if you have any parting thoughts as to either the conversation that we've been having or more on the future. Turn it to you guys for your last words.
I think my last word is, we're all experiencing the challenges of continuing to do simulation in the COVID related moment. And one of the questions we got ahead of time was something about, how are we handling the COVID blockade and of sim. And I think what I'd like to leave myself and all of you with is whenever we experience resistance to something we're trying to do, I try to look to myself first. Have I asked for the correct advice? Have I listened well enough? So I'm finding that if I approach my clinical colleagues and say, hey, I'm trying to help out with X clinical problem, or I'm trying to help out with Y issue, can you advise me a little on what are your pain points? What are your precious goals? And then I take that info and try to figure out how I can use simulation to meet them. So put briefly, resistance is a trigger to me that I have not done my listening well or my questions well, and I need to rethink them.
I would say, well, what she said, but the opportunity it's just so intuitive that in this ever-changing world and rapidly changing world that we need to learn. We need learning routines to allow us to adapt and keep up and even get ahead. And that it feels good to learn as well. And we know that's good for people, and we need psychological support right now. So it's obvious that we need learning. It's a very, very simple argument to make.
And it
But
would be easy to kind of block it out and cut it out. So I'm so glad you're saying that, Chris.
that's right. So how do we create the partnerships and the conversations such that we get back to learning? I think Maybelle's question, you know, are people doing in situ again? It's like, are we doing the things that we need to do to support what we need? Is a really great question. And let's get to having those conversations such that learning re-enters the picture, I think is the inspiration that I have.
So great, Chris. I think next week's session on design thinking informed simulation may be a really good intersection of praxis where the theories of design thinking and how we solve institutional or educational problems will really come together. I'm very excited for Jenny to host a session with Carrie White, Christopher Hicks, and Andrew Petrosniak from the University of Toronto. I know they've written about this topic. They've done wonderful workshops about it, and next week we'll have them live in this forum, and that session will also be recorded and available for those who can't make it. Jenny, would you add anything further on that?
Just that they've been embedding simulation in their hospital, St. Michael's, and they used a longitudinal approach to listening, querying, testing, using simulation to build out their new emergency department. And it was entirely built in this iterative process of design thinking plus simulation. So it's a really exciting journey, and look forward to sharing it with
So cool.
everybody.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great session. Other opportunities, we have a healthcare simulation essentials course in October and in November. We are dealing with a lot of these concepts and keep on making it 1% better. So many of us will be teaching in those courses. We have the Dash Rater training, which is a peer faculty development opportunity. You learn all about the debriefing assessment and simulation in healthcare, and how to observe and assess the quality of the debriefings in front of you. That's a great 4-hour workshop. Because we all need better skills to teach online and engage people, Mary Fay is leading a wonderful 3-day course in January. We had very successful course of that the last couple of months, and we're looking forward to that. And just because this is the time for us to continue moving online, we've just decided to offer the Advanced Instructor course. That's the second session that follows our initial week-long Healthcare Simulation Essentials. The 4-day program that really takes a look introspectively to think about your role as an educator and how to mentor and develop others. That advanced course is going to be online as well in February. I'm personally very excited that we've been able to transition online, Jenny and Chris and others, because that has just taken away so much of the uncertainty of, is it happening? How am I getting to that course? Will it get canceled? What if someone's, has a problem at home? So to me, I'm feeling a lot of calm in that. It's like control what you can control. And I'm so glad that at least I feel that the simulation community is thriving online. I look forward to connecting with you and everyone else further in this forum. And for anybody who's wanting something more specialized, more tailored to your organization, Mary, myself, Jenny, Chris, and others, we've been also quite successful with our coaching and consulting practice. That's been working really well online as well. And just like in other domains, we've been able to gather a lot of people together and make connections. So if you have any specific needs, do reach out. We'd be glad to talk about what that might look like for you and your organization. Big thanks to everyone again who joined Jenny, Chris, Ann, and the rest of our team, and those of you who joined for the session. Those of you who are joining in the future, I look forward to seeing you there. Have a great week, everyone. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.